When 16-year-old Dany was fined for mowing the lawn too early, his dad knew this wasn't just about noise, it was about control. Karen, the overzealous HOA president, used the rules to bully the neighborhood. But his next move? Absolutely no one saw it coming, and the way justice snapped it back. Now, that's a story you'll want to hear to the end. It was one of those perfect Saturday mornings, the kind where the sun peeked over the horizon just enough to stir you awake, but the air was still cool enough to make it feel like you could conquer the world without breaking a sweat. Dany, my 16-year-old son, was already up and at it. He wasn't like other teenagers who'd sleep in till noon. No, he was always eager to be productive. It wasn't that I had to push him. It was in his nature to get up and do something meaningful. Whether it was fixing a broken chair or tidying up the garage, he took pride in helping out. That morning he had his mind set on mowing the lawn, a task he'd taken on every weekend since he'd saved up for his own small push mower. I was in the kitchen enjoying my coffee in peace when I heard the familiar buzz of the mower kick to life outside. The sound was reassuring. Dany was doing his thing, taking care of business. It was routine. He always did this before it got too hot, and it was still early enough that the neighborhood hadn't woken up yet. But then, just 30 minutes later, there came a knock at the door. Not the usual postman or a neighbor popping by for a chat. No, this was different. I opened it to find Karen, the self-appointed HOA president, standing there, phone in hand, her expression as stern as ever. "You're breaking the rules," she said, her tone clipped, as if she had just caught us in the middle of something criminal. I blinked in confusion, trying to process what she was saying. She pointed to the clock on her phone. "No lawn work before 9 a.m. on weekends," she added, as if the words were written in stone. "It's the rule, and I'm fining you $100. A wave of disbelief washed over me. $100? For what? For trying to be responsible? For my son wanting to do something productive with his Saturday morning? The absurdity of it all made my blood boil. How could anyone possibly enforce a rule like that? It wasn't even 8:30 yet. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I didn't want to make a scene. Karen had that look in her eye, the one that said she had all the power, and she wasn't going to back down. As much as I wanted to argue, to fight back, I knew this wasn't the time. If I pushed back now, it would just escalate. So I forced a smile, taking the fine from her hand with as much grace as I could muster. "All right, Karen, we'll take care of it," I said, gritting my teeth. She gave me a quick nod as if she'd done her duty for the day and walked off, leaving me standing there, stunned. I closed the door behind her, my mind racing. I couldn't believe it. $100 for mowing the lawn too early? The rules were supposed to make things better, not punish good behavior. But I wasn't going to let this slide. It wasn't just the money. It was the principle. Dany had done nothing wrong. He was trying to be a good kid, helping out, and here we were, being penalized for it. I turned to find Dany standing by the window, watching the whole thing unfold. His face fell when he saw the fine in my hand. "Mom, is that for real?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. I didn't have an answer for him. How could I explain this? How could I tell him that the system that was supposed to support us, the community that was supposed to help us, was instead penalizing him for trying to do the right thing? I walked back inside, my stomach churning with frustration. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next day, Dany was still fuming. I could see it in his eyes every time he walked past me, this simmering frustration that he couldn't quite shake off. He had worked so hard for that mower, saving up for months with odd jobs around the neighborhood. It wasn't just a machine to him. It was a symbol of his independence, of him being able to contribute. And now, not only was he being punished for doing something good, something responsible, but the whole neighborhood knew about it. Word had already spread, and every time we ran into someone, they'd mention the fine. I could tell Dany was embarrassed, angry, and confused all at once. He didn't understand why a small act of responsibility was being treated like some sort of crime. I didn't understand either. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how ridiculous it all was. I kept replaying Karen's smug face in my mind. That look of absolute certainty, like she was the law, walking around with her head held high, like some self-righteous ruler of the neighborhood. The power she had, the way she enforced those arbitrary rules as if they were universal laws, drove me crazy. But it wasn't just the rules that bothered me. It was her attitude. She seemed to relish the control she had over everyone. There was no room for compromise, no room for common sense. Everything had to fit into her perfect little box, or else. And what made it worse was that she wasn't just enforcing the rules, she was practically parading them around, making sure everyone knew who was in charge. Every time she saw someone breaking one of her precious rules, she was there, quick to lecture and quick to punish. It was as if she thrived on this petty authority. It wasn't enough that we followed the guidelines of the HOA. No, Karen needed to be the one who reminded us of every tiny regulation, constantly reminding us of our place in the grand scheme of things. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Karen had taken something as simple as mowing the lawn and turned it into this ridiculous power struggle. She wasn't just an annoyance anymore. She was a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system. The rules, the fines, the arbitrary decisions. It was all designed to keep people like us in check, to remind us that we didn't have a say in the way things were done. We were just the little people, meant to follow the rules and stay out of the way. And then there was the way she acted. Walking around the neighborhood, chest puffed out, like she was some sort of queen, as if her word was law. I couldn't stand it. It was like she was living for these moments of control, getting off on the idea that she could impose her will on others. Every time I saw her, that sense of injustice flared up inside me again. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just accept it. Not for Dany, not for me, and certainly not for our neighborhood. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what yet. I needed to make her see that she couldn't get away with this, that we weren't going to sit by and let her trample all over us. But what could I do? How could I make her understand the damage she was causing? The more I stewed over it, the more I realized that something had to change. This wasn't just about one fine anymore. This was about standing up to the people who thought they could control every little aspect of our lives. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't going to let Karen get away with this. I wasn't going to let her keep pushing us around. Something was coming, and I was going to make sure she didn't see it coming. It was a quiet morning, the kind that pretends to be calm, just long enough to lower your guard. I had that gut feeling again, the same one I'd had the morning Dany got fined. Something was off. Something was coming. And I was right. At exactly 8:45 a.m., I heard the knock. Not the polite kind. It was deliberate, firm, like someone who thought they owned the place. I opened the door, and of course, there she was, Karen. Same expression as always, tight-lipped, eyebrows slightly raised, clipboard tucked under her arm, like she was on official government business. But this time, she didn't even pretend to be concerned. She wasn't there to ask questions or offer a warning. No, this time, she was here to send a message, a power move. "I just wanted to remind you," she began, her voice syrupy, sweet but sharp underneath, "about the HOA regulations regarding noise on weekends. We wouldn't want another incident like last Saturday, now would we?" I didn't say a word. I watched her, hoping this was just going to be another passive-aggressive drive-by. But she wasn't finished. Her eyes flicked past me, toward the hallway behind me, as if she were looking for Dany. Then she smiled, not warmly, but with a hint of satisfaction. "Dany won't make that mistake again, will he?" she said, holding up a new fine notice like it was a trophy. And that was it. Something snapped inside me, not loudly, not dramatically. It was quiet, like a switch flipping. Everything I'd been trying to keep down, the frustration, the helplessness, the anger, it all surged at once. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I just looked her in the eyes and said firmly, "You need to leave." She started to reply, probably to quote some section of the HOA handbook, but I didn't give her the chance. I closed the door, not gently, but not violently either. just enough to make it clear the conversation was over. I stood there for a second, hand still on the doorknob, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from focus. It was the kind of clarity you get when you finally stop second-guessing and decide to act. I walked straight to the garage. The space was dimly lit, cluttered with half-finished projects and leftover lumber from old repairs. Dany's mower stood in the corner, quiet and unassuming. I looked at it, really looked at it, and that's when the idea hit me. It was wild. It didn't make sense at first, but the longer I stood there, the more it began to take shape, and the more it felt not just right, but necessary. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was using them to intimidate us, to control, to humiliate. And we weren't the only ones. She had been doing this to the whole neighborhood for years, fine by fine, complaint by complaint, tightening her grip. And no one ever pushed back. Well, that was about to change. I smiled. Not a big, triumphant smile, just the kind you get when you figured out exactly what needs to be done. I had a plan. A ridiculous, over-the-top, completely unexpected plan. And I was going to make it happen. The next morning, I woke up with one thought in my mind. If Karen wanted to make lawn mowing a battle, I was going to bring an army. I got dressed, skipped breakfast, and headed straight to the local hardware store. As I walked in, I could tell the clerk wasn't expecting someone on a mission. "Looking for something in particular?" he asked casually. "Lawn mowers," I replied. "All of them." He blinked. "All of them?" "Yes, every single one." At first he thought I was joking, but once I started pointing, model by model, and he saw me pull out my credit card without hesitation, he realized I was dead serious. One mower after another was wheeled out to my truck. By the time I was done, the display section was empty, and the showroom floor looked like it had been hit by a hurricane of purpose. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I scoured the entire neighborhood. I combed through garage sales, local buy and sell listings, and even knocked on a few doors. "Selling your mower?" I'd ask. "I'll take it today, full price." Most people were too surprised to say no. Some didn't even ask why. They just handed over the handle, pocketed the cash, and shook their heads as I drove off with another machine in the back. It didn't take long before the rumors started. "Did you hear? He's buying every mower." Some folks thought I was opening a landscaping business. Others assumed I was collecting them for parts. But no one guessed the truth. By Friday afternoon, my garage looked like a showroom. Rows of mowers lined the walls, gleaming under the flickering ceiling lights. Push mowers, self-propelled ones, even a couple of those old-fashioned reel types. My driveway? Packed. My backyard? Same. Dany helped me clean and prep each one, and as we worked side by side, I could see the spark coming back into his eyes. This wasn't just a project anymore. It was a statement. Saturday morning arrived, 6:59 a.m. We stood in the driveway, Dany and I, engines primed, machines lined up like soldiers ready for roll call. The air was still cool, the kind of crisp that makes sound travel farther. At exactly 7 o'clock, I gave the signal. The engines roared to life, not just one or two, but 10, then 15, then 20. It was like an orchestra made entirely of horsepower and grass-cutting glory. The entire neighborhood lit up with the sound, buzzing, growling, rattling in unison. I could see blinds flipping open, curtains twitching, heads poking out of windows. It wasn't chaos. It was precision. We didn't just mow our lawn. We mowed every lawn. Side by side, up and down the street, front yards were transformed row by row as neighbors peeked out in disbelief. We weren't breaking the rules. We were just early. By the time the HOA handbook allowed lawn work to begin, the job was already done. The lawns were perfect. The lines were sharp. And Karen? She hadn't even stepped outside yet. We kept the engines running a few minutes longer, just long enough to make sure the sound settled into every corner of the block. Not out of spite, but to make it clear, the neighborhood had been heard. That morning, we didn't just mow grass. We made a point. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops when Karen finally emerged. You could see her from halfway down the street, marching with purpose, her signature clipboard clutched tightly in one hand, lips pressed into a thin line. But by the time she reached the first corner of our block, the sight that greeted her was unexpected. Every single lawn was freshly trimmed. Not just trimmed, manicured. Edges neat, grass even, sidewalks swept clean. It looked like the entire neighborhood had been through a professional landscaping blitz. The air still buzzed faintly from the last of the engines being shut off, a quiet aftermath to the early morning symphony. I was already outside, leaning against my front porch railing, arms crossed, just waiting. Behind me, a line of mowers stood in a proud row, our fleet, idle now, but ready. Dany stood beside me, still a little out of breath, hair tousled from effort, but grinning ear to ear. Karen's eyes swept across the scene, her jaw tightened with every step. She didn't just walk toward me, she stormed. Her heels clicked sharply against the sidewalk, her expression caught somewhere between confusion and outrage. "What is this?" she snapped, stopping a few feet from me. "You're breaking HOA rules again." I didn't move, didn't even blink. I just looked at her, calm and collected. "Oh, but we're just doing what's best for the neighborhood, right?" I replied, a polite smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "You know, early mornings are so much better for the grass." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time since we moved in, Karen was speechless. Behind her, I could see the neighbors watching from porches, behind hedges, through screen doors. Some were smiling. A few gave me subtle nods. Others just watched with wide eyes. But there was something different in the air, something I hadn't felt before. Unity. Because this wasn't just about one fine anymore. This wasn't just about Dany. This was about all of us, about the way she'd used the rules not to protect the neighborhood, but to control it, to control us. And now, in broad daylight, the power she held so tightly was slipping. She stood there a moment longer, lips twitching, as if trying to form a comeback. But she couldn't find one. Not today, not with 20 perfectly mowed lawns surrounding her. Without another word, she turned and walked away, not with the confident stride she usually had, but stiff, controlled, retreating. The clipboard hung a little lower now, and that was it. I looked at Dany. He looked at me. We didn't say anything. We didn't have to. We just stood there in that quiet victory, breathing it in. From that day forward, Karen never fined us again. She never even knocked on our door. And every Saturday morning, Dany and I kept mowing. Same time, same routine. But now, it wasn't just a chore. It was tradition. It was pride. It was ours. And every time we fired up the mower, we did it with the quiet knowledge that one small act, done with enough heart and enough horsepower, could reclaim a little dignity, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us.